Ghosting is that translucent appearance where you're like, I'm sure that's dead. Now, this is actually a good thing to see. You don't always see ghosting, but when you see it, it's a good thing. But do not move a cell that's still ghosted into your next step, the DS. Wait for the squeeze. I want to see this really good shrinkage, the marked shrinkage. The protocol says 1 minute. In most donor eggs, 1 minute's like magic. But sometimes it might need a little bit more time. Don't be afraid to give it another 10 or 15 seconds. Because every cell is different, especially, I talk about this in a lot of my fertility preservation patients. If you have an older lady's eggs, they maybe don't react as much as we'd expect. So don't be afraid to give them maybe a little bit more time and watch what's happening. I think it's important to not be a slave to your timer, but be engaged in the process. So during the VS step, the TS step, we want to see that shrink or the squeeze. So really important. This is an example of oocytes that on warming were flat. So it looked like they were stepped on, and they don't recover at all. This is an example of excessive VS exposure. So what can be excess VS exposure? Well, you were in there for more than a minute. That can be a problem. But it's also really due to loading technique. This is one of those examples where trying to be perfect can work against you. So when you're loading your device, you got to think about, okay, I'm dealing with 1 microliter here. And if I'm like, okay, I'm going to be perfect, while you're doing that, it's evaporating like crazy and it's concentrating. You can get an overexposure event. Your pipetting technique, your loading technique, you've got to be proficient. This is also in laboratories we run, we don't have people freeze eggs until they do everything else. Their pipetting skills have been mastered. We don't ask them to freeze eggs until we know they can really work well. And this is a good example of it. Trying to be perfect loading and being a little excessive in your timing is actually bad. So you're going to be pretty deliberate. Load, pull, good to go, get it plunged. So this is something to be aware of. So after the VS, TS step, again, we want to see the squeeze. We want to see that real good shrinkage. Next step, we go to DS, dilution solution. Dilution solution, half strength. We went from 1 molar trihalo's to 0.5 molar trihalo's. What's my expectation? My expectation after the 3 minutes is the cells should still be shrunken a bit because I'm still in a sugar solution. I do want to see an enlarged perigonal space. Take a second and look. I've had people call me when they thaw eggs and like, the embryos or the oocytes look great and then they die. And I'm like, you missed it. Because if you watch how did it react in TS, how did it appear in DS, you're never surprised if they don't survive in the WS step. So again, be involved, be engaged in the process. Take a look before you move from DS to WS. I expect enlarged perigonal space. I also look at this as kind of like the sperm survival test. The sperm survival test is about sperm viability. Same thing with the eggs. We talk a lot about freezing and ice is bad. Ice is the enemy. Ice destroys cells. Totally true. But what about the cell membrane? The cell membrane does not form ice, but it's a fat. It's a bilipid layer. What does that do when it freezes? Well, it becomes gelatinous and kind of gross. But if you do it right, it survives well. If your cryo technique's off or something's wrong, you'll get holes in that membrane. And this is where you'll see it in your reaction in TS and your reaction in DS. So again, ice is bad, but what about the cell membrane? So when I'm warming eggs, for me it's an osmotic challenge test. How are these eggs reacting? And that's why I love eggs, because I can see it. Embryos, much more difficult. I can't see individual cells in the blastocyst. So we got to rely a little bit more on our timing and everything else. And then the final result, what's it look like? But with oocytes, we have the opportunity to be engaged and see how the interaction with the media is occurring.